good evening, couples and singles that are paying attention or looking for us tonight. Welcome to Marriage Mondays. I'm Nick Brinson, and this is my wife, Trina Brinson. Under the leadership of Dr. Finest and Lady Denise Bush, we come to you with Marriage Mondays, hoping to give you some advice about your relationships and just hope that you will continue to improve and learn how to deal with each other on a daily basis. All right, we're in and we're watching, and we see one person has come on. I just want to thank y'all for tuning in tonight. Just waiting for a few more people to join us tonight as we get ready for tonight's episode of Marriage Mondays. With conflict is inevitable in a relationship, and tonight we're hoping to give you some tips on how to work through that. We just want to thank Ms. Shoshana Wesby for coming on, and Zakia Sylvan. We got Samika Cummins. Thank y'all for tuning in tonight. While we wait for people to come in, we just want to kind of address what we talked about last week about the 5 levels of communication starting out, and my wife addressed those last week. So what you want to say about them?
About the 5 levels of communication? Well, our purpose in talking about it was just to make you aware that there are different levels of communication. So simply talking to each other is not enough. You have to go beyond just the sharing of facts or cordial exchanges, or even getting a little deeper into sharing opinions, ideas, and hopefully get to an intimate level of communication where you're really talking about things that are in your heart, even talking about things that you need to confess to someone, or things that you can work through, having that deep level of intimacy, making yourself vulnerable in your conversation with your spouse, and that's a deeper level of communication that helps your relationship to become stronger as you share that kind of information. So that's pretty much, that was the levels that we talked about last week.
And we also addressed the 5 keys of communication. The first one, learn how to be honest with each other. Being honest helps the conversation go from one level to the next. Learn how to deal with your anger. We talked about the scripture, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Learn how to address those problems when you come to them. That's also kind of what we're going to talk about tonight, is learning how to address those problems and get through them so the sun does not go down on your anger. How you doing, Brother Charles, Uncle Charles? Number 3, be intentional about what you expect out of each other to allow for open communication. Slow down and watch your words. This can cause a problem if you say something that cut your partner or cut them deep, and you done said something to them that you use something against them that they've told you. That can halter communication between the two. Also, keep the relationship clear of debris, meaning always clear out anything so you can keep an open line of communication, so the line doesn't get cluttered with stuff that has not been addressed. All it does is make for more and more discomfort in the relationship and possibly less trust. Also, last one, listen with your heart. We gotta learn how to listen instead of talk more of the time. So listen to what your partner has to say. So with that said, that was a recap of basically what we talked about last week. Just want to let the viewers know that this lesson we're doing tonight about conflict resolution, we're also going to allow Bishop to come on next week and kind of solidify what we talked about tonight. The information that we had tonight is basically from his personal collection of notes and experiences and some of the counseling sessions that he's been in. So the information we're going to give you tonight is basically coming strictly from him. So next week, when we come on Marriage Monday Night, he will be here to address tonight. So we look forward to Bishop coming on with us next week, if time allows and he's not busy and something doesn't come up. So we just look forward to that next week.
And the content tonight too is some of the materials that he used, or concepts and what he used in working with us as well. So they work.
They work and work well.
Yeah, and thank you for those who are sharing your posts as well. If you are hosting a watch party and someone within your watch party asks a question, please share that at the main location where we're broadcasting from. This is from the church webpage, the Crown Kingdom. So in order for us to see your questions, we need to see them. You may have to retype one of your watchers' questions and where we can see them. So we are monitoring the Crown Center page, and also Nick Brinson, his Facebook page, and mine. So you'd have to be able to either be on one of our watch parties or on with the church for us to see your questions. We are monitoring for those.
Okay. So it's 5 minutes after. We try to get these episodes started with the meat and the topic for tonight. And tonight's topic is conflict is inevitable in a relationship. So what I want to do, I want to read an excerpt from from some of the information that the bishop has sent us. And it reads, if any couple thinks that they are not going to have disagreements, they are tragically self-deceived and headed for trouble. Almost 50% of all divorces take place within the first 2 years of the wedding day. Think of that. Couples get married, encounter conflict, give up, all within 2 years. There are 2 points about this scenario that I find disturbing. First, those couples have been profoundly unaware of how challenging it is to make a marriage work. They were certainly unaware of the number of conflicts that would arise. Second, they must have been alarmingly ill-equipped to handle their conflicts. The management of conflict is complex but entirely a learnable skill. Unfortunately, those couples never develop those skills, or at least not acquire the level of proficiency to solve those skills. Now, that paragraph says a mouthful. That's why couple counseling is important, by somebody that's been married or knowledgeable about what it takes to be married. As you know, you and your wife are two different people, or you and your husband are 2 different people. Pretty good chance that y'all gonna be indifferent about something. And when you're indifferent with somebody about something, it will cause a conflict. You have to know that person well enough, or you just have to know the skills in order to solve that issue that y'all are going through. And my question is, while you're dating, how are you learning how to solve your conflicts within that dating relationship? Because I'm sure something came up in that relationship that required y'all to get some skills to solve a conflict y'all went through. Or y'all just let it sit on the table and cause debris in your relationship, and you didn't have the equipment after you got married to solve the conflict. That's why tonight's episode is very important, because a lot of people still don't know how to resolve their conflicts.
Right, and every conflict should not cause a bigger problem. And if you allow those conflicts to linger, it can actually fester and become just this one big ongoing argument, or every conflict that comes up after, everything becomes a big deal because you haven't learned how to resolve conflict between the 2 of you. So it's critical to learn skills for making decisions, because sometimes it's not necessarily that it's a argument, or sometimes it's just the process of trying to make a decision about what to do, how to move forward, which phone company to use, where the kids go to school, what furniture to buy for the house. I mean, it can be any type of decision. You need a process of decisions, so that you kind of have a go-to or almost an autopilot in learning to problem solve.
Okay. And my wife mentioned the problem solving process. There are basically 5 steps you could take to solve a problem. There are all kind of problem solving models out there on the internet that you and your wife can watch, that y'all can mimic or copy based on how both of y'all understand. But this one right here is a 5-step that we looked online, and the bishop, we talked to the bishop earlier today about the information we will present tonight, and he gave us this model. It's in 5 steps. The step 1, clarifying the outcome. How do you want this thing to end? How does it end in peace? What needs to happen in order for y'all to live with each other and come up with a situation that both of y'all can live with? So that needs to happen first.
That's usually the easy part, because most of the time you both want the same outcome. It's just getting to that outcome and the details in between that is where the problem arises. Most of the time you want the same thing. So that's usually an easy step, just to decide, well, what do we want the outcome to be? What are we trying to accomplish?
Yep, and that takes discussion and communication. The second step, after you figure out what y'all want it to be, state the problem. Why do we have a problem if both of us want this to happen? Then you got to decide what that problem is, and why y'all two can't come up with a solution together without going through these steps, because there are probably some underlying things in there that you hadn't addressed that you need to talk about. Third step, now what's really going on. Analyze the problem. So when you analyze something, it's supported by details, and details come through the communication. So when you analyze what the problem is, then you can go to step 4, make a decision based on the information that you've talked about, and both of y'all are hopefully even-minded people where you can talk to each other without allowing your own selfishness to get involved, that you can figure out and make a decision on what needs to happen. And then together, in the 5th step, plan and implement. Make the plan, and then what I call, being a coach, make it happen. Make the plan and make it happen. All right, so that's the one thing that's the problem-solving process that we're going to talk about tonight. If you need some help, step 1, clarifying the outcome. Step 3, analyze that problem. 4, make a decision on that problem. 6, plan and implement and make it happen, so both people can get what they need out of the situation. And you can almost do this for anything that comes up in the marriage situation. All right. Anything else to say about that? All right. Continuing on. Also, Bishop is working on a new novel, a new book, self-help book that deals with relationship, and he gave us some statistics tonight to share with the couples and the singles. There have been several studies done to shed light on matters of marriage, marital conflict, and how it should be managed. We're going to highlight several of these right here. All right. One of the largest surveys of marital conflict involved 2,143 husbands and wives. The results indicated how negatively many couples handle their conflict. Each year, in 16% of the American couples, at least one spouse commits a violent act against his or her partner. Further, 28% of all couples experience some violence over the course of their marriage. Now, when you're talking about conflict resolution, put violence in it. There really is no need for physical violence in a marriage situation, because hopefully there's enough trust between you two where it doesn't have to get to that. But based on these statistics that we've been given, 16% married couples commits violence against the other person, and 28% experience some form of violence. That's way too much in a marriage relationship.
Well, I think a lot of people witnessed violence, and so as a method of dealing with problems, when there haven't been good models of cordial or civilized problem solving, presented for you, and if what you've seen is people fighting and using violence or even verbal aggression, if those are the things that you have witnessed among couples for the way that they deal with problems, then you have to be cognizant that that is something that's in your mind, that you've experienced. And so in order for you to not reference those things, even though you may intend that you're not going to participate in that, you have to give yourself some other tools so that you are better equipped for problem solving. So you don't kind of default to what has been modeled for you. Because very often people who witness violence can in fact exhibit violence later on, because that's what's been taught.
All right, another statistic. John Gottman and Lowell Krokoff studied 30 couples over 3 years and concluded that conflict engagement of specific kind may be functional for a marriage longitudinally, but indicative of defensive stubbornness, withdrawal, particularly on the husband part. Basically what they're saying is, if you learn to manage your conflicts in your marriage, manage them and manage them well, your marriage has a huge chance of making it. Basically, that's what that study was saying. If you learn how to manage your conflicts well within the marriage, your marriage has a better chance of making it. E.G. Menningen interviewed 758 spouses and found that discussions about marital differences through uncomfortable and stressful, although uncomfortable and stressful, were associated with fewer subsequent problems in a relationship. Basically what they're saying to me is talk to each other. No matter how hard the discussion get or how uncomfortable the subject matter may be, you got to learn to talk to each other, because that goes into that level 4 and level 5 level of communication. And so if you learn to address the uncomfortable stuff in your marriage, that makes y'all put y'all more in a place of cohesion and togetherness, because you know you're not in this by yourself.
And we know that men very often don't talk as much as women do. Just looking at categories. Of course, there's exceptions either way. Some men are talkers. But most of the time, women talk a lot more than men. And there's kind of two sides to that coin, because whereas for the male, you have to get out of your head. You have to not just think. You can think all day long, but if you don't communicate that verbally to your spouse, then you're not communicating. And then there's no real understanding of what needs to be communicated between the two of you to bring about discussion. And on the flip side of that, for women, we have to be mindful not to talk so much that we overflood our male spouses, so that they don't have time to even think about and kind of marinate and saturate what we're giving them. We have to give them time to think and process that information. And so I think we have to be aware that communication is back and forth. I've heard of a metaphor where it's kind of like playing tennis. If you hit the ball and then it's in the other person's court, you're expecting a response back. If you don't hit the ball back, you're not playing the game together. You're not communicating. And so if your spouse, let's say the female makes a statement and says it, okay, well, you as the husband, you're expecting with communication as well. That's how you play the game. You're not playing the game if only one person is constantly talking. You're just hitting balls over the net. You're not actually playing a back and forth game of tennis, which is a metaphor for communicating. So it's very important that both spouses learn to regard one another's strengths and preferences whereas it comes to communication, so that there has to be some temperance on either side. You have to temper yourselves. If you're talking a lot, you have to be able to temper yourself as a male if you are not wanting to talk. You're going to have to overcome that feeling of not wanting to talk and prep yourself, talk yourself up, so that you can be a communication partner with your spouse for the sake of your relationship.
Just for, we always include ourselves in these Marriage Mondays. In our relationship, I would be considered the silent partner in the group, when you say, and my wife is the talker. And sometimes she'll ask a question, and her thing is, you need to get out your head and talk to me. What she's asking me, I've heard it. I'm trying to decipher what she's saying so I can give her an educated thought back. But sometimes if I say something that I hadn't thought about, it may come off wrong. So that's why I try to decipher what I'm going to say back to her before it comes out the wrong way. And sometimes, I get long-winded in my own discussion with myself. And she'll say, I thought we were having a conversation. I say, we are. And but a lot of that conversation is going on in my head.
Which means it's not a conversation with me. You have a conversation with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not helpful to me, and it comes off as disrespectful. Because if I'm asking you something and you just sitting there staring, I mean, give me something, a sign or something, a finger, wait, but give me something to acknowledge that you've heard what I've said, and then I can give you space to think about it. But I know I can't assume that I've been heard if there's no response.
Right. So I've been working on getting out of my head when she's talking to me, so I can give her a response back when there's a conversation that need to be had.
And
because that right there in itself can cause a conflict because...
Yep, and it does. It does cause conflicts with us. But I've had to learn to temper myself and slow myself down and go at a pace that works for both of us.
Okay. So that's one way that we handle certain conflicts. Now, there are several systems that both people need to buy into when you're talking about conflict resolutions or conflicts that's inevitable. So when you are in a conflict with your significant other, the basic rules with your spouse, the basic rules of love in a relationship, we got 4 of these tonight. And these are the ones that come from our bishop, and that we were probably going to have a lengthy discussion about later with him on next week with him on. The first one is give and demand equality at all times. What does that? What would you think that means?
About giving demand equality, there has to be a sense of neither one of us is more important than the other. We're both necessary for this relationship, and neither of us is more important. We have to consider equality in our value. Right.
And sometimes when you hear equality, it doesn't mean that, okay, if we got 10 things that we got to separate, it doesn't mean that she's going to do 5 and I'm going to do 5. Because those 10 things may have the equivalence of me being able to do 6 of them well and she may able to do 4 of them well. That right there itself is inequality, because those 6 things are within my strengths. And it might be 4 of them, and those 4 may be in her strengths. So it doesn't matter if it's not a 50-50.
Right.
Everything is not going to be split down the middle of you take this 50% and I take this 50%. It just doesn't work like that. That's not how equality in relationships work. Equality in a relationship works with your strengths and your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. And acknowledging each other's strengths and weaknesses. And sometimes there's things maybe neither of you is stronger at, or maybe both of you are equally strong in an area. So you just make a decision between the two of you who handles what. And, you might get it this time, I might get it next time. But there's just has to be that sense of value, that both people bring value that is equal to the table.
Right. All right.
It's not related to money either.
Right.
Or income.
Mm-hmm.
That has nothing to do with the equality. If one person goes outside of the house to work and the other person stays inside the home and takes care of whatever responsibilities have been determined to be the way you divide up responsibilities within the home, that has nothing to do with equality. You know, it's not that you get all the housework because one person goes outside of the house. The home is still that shared responsibility. It doesn't mean that the person who goes outside the home and makes the finances, that they have control over the money. That's not what equality means either. Equality means that we value each other and that we work together as a team in order to accomplish what we need as a family. Right. No one person is more important than the other, because without one of you, you don't have.
Just doesn't work. So you got to decide what the responsibilities are in your relationship, and that helps to deter conflicts from arising. But if they do, have a method of resolving them. All right. The second system of the basic rules of love in a relationship: talk and listen openly and honestly. Talk and listen openly and honestly. Communication is like the nervous system of love. If this system is healthy, information and feelings are constantly being transmitted from one person to the next. You value your own experiences and your partner's also. So talk openly and listen to each other. That means that I'm interested in who she is and she's interested in who I am. And we've got different experiences coming from two different totally backgrounds from where we come from. Interested in what my feelings are, and I'm interested in what her feelings are and her values are. That brings us close together. Okay? So learn to do that for each other or with each other.
And to be honest, I mean, that part about honesty is just as important as being open. Because if you're putting up a facade or you have guards up, that makes it hard to be in relationship with you, because you're not bringing your real, true self to the relationship, and that's not fair. So if you're married to somebody, you need to be open and to be able to let your guard down. And as far as the spouse needs to know that they are trustworthy in order for you to let your guard down, knowing that they can trust you, you can trust each other with that level of vulnerability, which goes back to that level 5 communication, where you're able to be intimate and expose yourself emotionally without having fear of that being exploited.
In the comment section, our bishop made a comment, said, make sure you are communicating parallel, not vertical, as if your spouse is a child.
Exactly.
That's
critical.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, because you're not each other's parent.
No.
And it's very common that people tend to marry or choose a spouse that might resemble or kind of feel that need for them of parenting. But you know, it comes a point you really do have to grow up. You should be your own parent in adulthood. You have to govern yourself. And so when you show up as an adult who manages him or herself as an adult, you don't need that parental figure guiding your day-to-day life. You become your own parent. You have to manage yourself and not count on someone else to parent you. You just have to, you got to grow up. Marriage is for grown people. It's for mature people, not for immature people, not for children. So that's a huge factor, because that's how you get that vertical communication when you're speaking to your spouse as if you are their parent. That's going to be unequal ground and uneven ground for your relationship with one another.
And just the thinking about how parallel lines and vertical lines move, if you're parallel with your spouse, y'all are moving at the same rate, in the same direction all the time. But if one goes vertical and the other one is horizontal, you're moving in two different directions, and it's hard to meet in a spot where both of y'all can agree. So that's a very important statement. Thank you, Bishop. Number 3, Recognize and confront problems directly. Address situations head on, exchanging and listening without subconscious sidestepping. Now, how many of us do that? Instead of addressing what the problem is, we take the sidestep approach and we were like, okay, we'll just table that discussion. We do it. But guess what? It's always there. So learn how to talk about your situations head on and not try to sidestep them and act like you're going to sweep them up under the rug.
I think that's why it's important to schedule a time to deal with conflict, because it is important to deal with a problem head on, but not in the heat of the moment. Because if you're talking out of anger and out of frustration in the heat of the moment, you are not likely to get the kind of results that you would if had you chosen to wait and pray about it first and come together ready to talk about, ready to confront that situation. So I think it's careful to make that distinction that confronting a problem head on doesn't mean it has to be addressed directly when there is a conflict. And so setting up a time to meet and talk about that issue, that's not sidestepping it, that's scheduling a time for you to deal with the conflict so that you can come up with a resolution.
I remember in one of our sessions, we were having a discussion with the bishop and the first lady, and the one of the most important things I got out of that session was there can be a conflict you can address every day in your relationship. There is something may be aggravated with the other. So that's not that's not how you want to handle it, because it'll come across as we're always having problems. We always have a conflict. We don't do nothing but argue. So that's why it's important to set aside a day, a week. If you find yourself in this flow of having conflicts every day, and take that one day, sit down together, and talk about the conflicts. However many it is, you write them down as they come, and y'all get together and talk about them. And one way that we've been told to do the conflict, which makes a lot of sense to me, if you're holding hands and touching, you're touching each other during the conflicts, it may cause you not to get yourself involved emotionally into anger. So learn when you're having these conflict resolutions, learn to touch each other. Okay? So that was one skill. And it does calm the spirit when you feel like you're talking to another person. You actually feel that person's spirit. If y'all brought prayer into that, you actually do feel the other person's spirit, and you can get through your situation without very much anger involved. You'll solve it. You'll come up with a way to solve it. Yeah, thanks.
Well, and sitting face to face makes a difference too, because all your attention and all your energy is focused towards that other person. So when you're sitting face to face and you're both holding each other's hands, it forces you to really deal with and focus on each other and your relationship in that moment, so that you're not distracted, so you're not kind of got your back turned, or even side by side is not the same. When you're face to face with one another, have to look at each other, to have to touch each other, and to kind of temper your own emotions to focus on. Because if you're too immature to hold your spouse's hand, I mean, you really just got to check yourself. That's one of those things where you cannot continue as a child. You have to behave as an adult, and that's an adult relationship, and that's an adult type of interaction, to be able to be angry but temper yourself for the sake of the relationship, and so that God's glory is able to come forth, because He doesn't get the glory by you kind of sulking and just saturating yourself in that anger. He gets the glory when you learn to overcome, when you can facilitate peace in your relationships, and that has to be what your focus is, which is ultimately to prove or to show your love for God in your actions towards your spouse.
Okay. And the last one we're going to share The basic rules of love and relationships is share responsibility for problems and solutions. You will not survive as a loving couple unless both of you are able to admit your mistakes and say, I'm sorry. Remember we talked about apologizing?
Right.
Learning how to apologize to your significant other. We had that lesson about maybe 3 classes ago for diffuses arguments and open the door for compromise and compassion.
Right. Yeah, apologizing and forgiving, and being gracious, in that process, and not once again that level of maturity comes in. It's not about gloating, but to graciously accept an apology, to graciously forgive one another. That's where God gets glory. He's looking for the characteristics of Christ. It's our responsibility to allow the mind of Christ to be in us and for us to take on the attributes of Christ as his children. And a marriage is the perfect place for you to practice those skills, because that's, if you're married, that's always going to be an opportunity. There's an opportunity for your character to dictate your behavior. And so there's an opportunity right there for you to practice being Christ-like. And it is a practice. And when you live with somebody, you can't fake it. You can fake it for the church folks. You can fake it for the people at work. But when you live with somebody, you can't fake it. You have to actually, it's a lot of stress on you to try to keep up an act that's not real. So you have to be open and honest and really allow God to change you as necessary through your marriage relationship. And it really is ultimately about glory and you reflecting the relationship that Christ has with the church.
Okay. Well, that's it for tonight's lesson. All the things we had to give you. We talked about the decision-making model, or how to solve your conflicts, and the system we both must buy into, the basic rules of love and relationships. So with that said, just want to remind you, next week we will have Bishop Bush on to kind of solidify and talk a little bit more in depth about what we talked about tonight. And we look forward to that happening.
Mm-hmm. So we encourage you to take to heart the things that we've discussed, and even take this week to just try implementing some of the concepts that we've talked about. And we'd love for you to share with us your successes, your failures, questions that may come up of how to go about implementing some of these strategies in your relationship, problems you've run into. We are more than happy to hear about your wins and even your fails. If you want to share those, because you'd be amazed at how much other people can learn from what you're experiencing. So we encourage that, and Bishop Bush will be on with us, and he can also help expound. So let's take advantage of, he's an awesome resource in reference to marriage relationship through all the years of counseling, all the professional training. He is a professional counselor as well as a pastor, and we need to take advantage of having access to his skill level, to his knowledge, even as a psychologist. We need to take advantage of that. So we encourage you all to ask those questions and get the answers that you need for your relationship. We want you to succeed, and we're here to encourage you and hopefully arm you with some of the tools that you need to become skilled in your relationship.
All right. We just want to thank y'all for joining us again tonight. Appreciate your willingness to sit here and listen and get information that's going to better improve your marriage and your relationship with your wife or with the person that you're dating. We just want to thank you again tonight for joining us. And from the lady and the coach, we love you. Good night.